This is my first day. I'm in the process of killing it. It's cloudy. I'm hoping for better days for hiking and stuff like that. These cartoon sculptured figures of military men remind me of Maudlin's cartoons from the Second World War. Can only imagine the adventures this boat has seen. All the copper plating, one over the other, attempts to repair the water seeping in over age. Notice how her hull is broken there. God, what stories this could tell. From the day it was built to this. This is a model of the ship that Fernando Magellan sailed on 21st October 1520. It was called a carrack, C-A-R-R-A-C. He was the first European who sighted the land and called it Tierra de Los Fuegos, land of fire. Just for the novelty in these ships was the Portuguese ships was the foredeck and the poop deck. I'm guessing the poop deck is either this one in the back on the top or in the middle. These were the Endracht, E-N-D-R-A-C-H-T, the Skooten and the Maier, M-A-I-R-E sailed. They were the first to discover Mauritius land, known as Mitri Peninsula today. This boat was called a hooker by design, and its most important factor was probably its bulbous hull, which allowed for a greater capacity of cargo. This more simple ship, without the foredeck and much of a rear deck, was known for its, first of all, it was similar to a caravel, and it's known for its maneuverability. It had lane-teen sails, enabling them to sail against the wind, a Portuguese design. This was the Fragata Liberdade. This was an icebreaker, relatively modern. You can see by the helicopter pad in the back. Picture of one of its significant rescues, and another. This is the first boat built in Tierra del Fuego using the wood from the wreck of the Spanish galleon Purísima Concepción in 1765. It's notable that this small ship started to Buenos Aires with 193 survivors of the wreck, and 4 died of suffocation. They were so packed in. This is a life-size diorama of the Yamana people and the bark canoes that they used. It's interesting to note that one of the theories today, the new proposed theories of migration initially into South America, this tip of South America, was directly across from Asia. And is it possible that something made like this could have been the device used? Some photos of the old canoes and the long spears used. This is interesting for its array of spears. These are some pictures of the Yamana people, probably before they were extirpated, or however you pronounce that. It's interesting that the rags are clothes given by the Europeans because of their sensitivities of the natives' nakedness, more often than not caused injury in the form of diseases to the natives who were kept naturally clean by the rainwater. This is the ship Descubierta, or Discoverer, 1789. It's interesting, in these early years of discovery, the natives were so violent that sailors preferred not to even sight land, but to totally avoid it. In 1884, this ship, the Piranha, sailed up the harbor, or Beagle Strait, into the area of Ushuaia, and established some kind of a mission for the Yamanas. It was a gunship, as you can see from the guns on board, but it doesn't look like it was anything very powerful. It did have an engine, as you can see. And here we're looking at a map. It may not be that good, so I may have to disregard this, but anyway, you can see there's Ushuaia right down there. This would be Beagle Channel running up through here. Assuming this is even visible through the glass, there's Ushuaia there. This would be Beagle Channel. Magellan Channel up through here. Notice how that cuts across. And it became an English a trading route that was controlled by the English after the English destroyed the Spanish Armada. And it did for the English here what control of the Silk Road did for whoever controlled that. This portrays the Duchess of Albany, which apparently is known most. It was one of more than, I think, 193 ships wrecked in these areas. The ship, Uno de Mayo, is most known because in 1896 she brought the first group of 14 convicts from Buenos Aires. She had a coal engine which was used principally with sails as kind of backup. This nautical chart is particularly interesting because it shows, sadly, and I'm not laughing for the men, but for the irony, or the consistency with the reality of this area. The red icons represent shipwrecks, and there are considerable there. Occasionally you see them in other places here. But now let's go down to the Horn. Ilsa Hornos, okay, Cape Hornos. Now look at that, just packed. And apparently this one is a different ship, whether it was a submarine or what, I can't make out from the icon. And here perhaps the most famous ship of this era, and that's my interpretation, if only because it carried Darwin. But as I pan slowly along the deck, try to imagine him standing in various places, looking out, pondering what he was finding, wondering what it all meant, because he didn't really discover, quote unquote, his theory until he was back in England. And in fact, the basis for his theory, which was so epiphanous, was what he learned in the Galapagos. But it was on this ship that he gathered the knowledge that he would need to make those decisions. Did he ever climb the rigging, in which would have been his room? This ship, the La Romanche, is a French ship, notable for its tall rigging. Notice it also has an engine. Notice it also has guns. But among other things, one of its important benefits was apparently in the study of anthropology in this area. And these are parties which are hard to get a good view of because of the reflection from the Amundsen expedition to Antarctica, 1911, 1912. It just humbles me to think of the courage these men have. When today we think about going to Antarctica on a big ship and have to determine, for example, if that ship has the international safety standard certification that we should be requiring of ourselves. Well, these men on the Fram, the name of his boat, had to concern themselves with getting trapped in the ice and having their boat crushed like Shackleton's, as opposed to worrying about whether the boat will smash through the ice effectively or not. This is a ship bought by Thomas Bridges, who owned the Estancia at Arberton that we will visit on the cruise ship. He bought it to avoid the extortive prices of shipping things to the mainland through commercial ships. This was a critical business decision for the obvious reason that up to a future point in time, beyond this point in time, this was the only way that you got from Buenos Aires or any other place to Tierra del Fuego in a halfway efficient manner. And this is La Romanche at Cape Horn in 1882. This is the boat we saw outside, I believe, the Shukua cutter of the old family Biban. Ironically, she doesn't look a whole lot better in the picture than she does out front. If you really get excited about these boats, you can go on somewhere and probably find this chart. I may also have a chart like this in Daniel Defoe's book on pirates, the definitive treatise, I might add, on pirates, ships. This was a typical whaling boat at the end of the 19th century. Carried at least 6 whaler boats, 4 for 5 oarsmen and 2 others for 9. Certainly read Moby Dick and get probably the most accurate and complete explanation of what whaling was like on these ships. This was a polar ship specifically built for the Antarctic. It has a triple hull separated by tar paper. They used wood instead of metal on the assumption that the wood would have some give during the bumping of the ice against the ship. The ship is on display in Oslo, but apparently the rudder and the propeller can be removed from above shipboard or from within the ship to protect it in dire circumstances. This was the Argentine Antarctic ship called the Ushuaia corvette that was most notable because of its rescue in 1903 of Nordenskjold's expedition. I wonder if the Nordenskjold is the same Nordenskjold of Robert Service, Alaskan Canadian Territories fame. It is also a ship that I either visited or took a video from the outside of when I was in Puerto Madero in Buenos Aires. This ship, the Discovery, built in 1912 for polar exploration, used different kinds of woods for different functions, had a triple hull separated by insulation, and including the floors had insulation. But also we can see on deck there were various little buildings constructed for the purpose of laboratories such as photography, magnetic, biology. These were exciting times. Just some pictures of the natives, the Yamanas. Now, in case we're forgetting, we are inside of an old prison. So, as you can see, this is where the cells are. How original the floor, I don't know. This prison was first in Puerto Cook until 1902, and then moved for humanitarian reasons, whatever that means, to the Bay of Ushuaia. Very much the same as in Australia. You see Lago Fagnano, where I can take a tour. Ushuaia below it to the left. This is where Puerto Cook was. As we can see, it was remote even from Tierra del Fuego, since way over here somewhere is Ushuaia. A view of Ushuaia, 1917. Prisoners working on the streets in Ushuaia. Construction of the wharf. Or vagonetas, which I thinking means prisoners. Embarque de los Presos. And here is the train. It was a very small gauge. I believe this was the train. Some typical rooms, not altogether unfamiliar to those of us who sleep in hostels. At least here they were intelligent enough to have enough distance between the bottom bunk and the bottom of the top bunk so that you could sit upright on the bed. And here the prisoners are building some streets. So they would have been well-recognized people doing great public service. The prison and its prisoners provided the first press, and therefore I assume the first newspaper. Here, provided furniture for the town. Don't know what they're doing here. They apparently also provided tailor services, a broom factory. These are just some photographs of the era of strikes, and I assume that connects with the story I had when I was in El Calafate, where the 200 people were murdered by the owner of the estancia and his puppet police, or I should say in control of his puppet police. So old bombs used for attacks on railroads and streets. Notice these benches outside some of the cells. Wonder when they were used. Here are the prisoners cutting down the forest and then preparing the pathway for the railroad that they would build. Here are two of the locomotives, one of which hopefully I'll ride on in the next several days. Goes now up to the national park. This is a statue of one of the notable criminals. This man here, who killed people with both a wire garrote or lariat and one child with a nail through the temple. This depicts the iron shackles that were used when moving the most dangerous of criminals. You obviously weren't going far with those puppies. The key to the iron gates of Pavilion 4 and 2. And I think these are the forms that were used to create the various tiles, and I'll pan onto the floor. You can see that same design. And here are the tracks of the railroad. Worker in the carpentry shop. This was the foundry. And here are the tailors. Some kind of choir group of the convicts. He points out that this model of a ship was made by a convict, and it's solid wooden matches, paper stream. It makes the interesting comment, it was usual that prisoners were devoted to works that demanded great patience and time. These, the uniforms worn, but notice the sunglasses. That's very interesting. Many Argentinians, most don't wear sunglasses. And of all countries in the world other than Antarctica, this is the place you should. Various pictures from the carpentry shop. Blacksmith shop. That's not it. I'm just reading off the names of what's done here. This may have been the saddle shop or Ford, I don't know. Certainly some kind of machine shop here. For what purpose, I don't know, but those are big sewing machines. I think this was for the either the Willie Nelson concert. Here's the little Tren del Fin Mundo, train at the end of the world doing its job. As an apparent tribute to my birth in 1940, sports were introduced here at the prison as a way of improving criminal life. Typesetter's cabinet with all the various fonts. I remember getting my merit badge in Boy Scouting and typesetting, or printing, I guess it was. Here are examples of the legendary restraints. Imagine hauling this ball, iron ball, around when it's attached to your leg. Hopefully the chain was long enough to allow a man to lift it up and hold it over the shackles. They weren't held by a simple little pin, but like a cotter pin, but in fact were hammered. Something was hammered in there, probably like a rivet. This graphic is somehow supposed to illustrate the concept of escaping. In fact, there were no documented actual escapes, although there were those who left and never came back, or were never found. This room just illustrates political prisoners who were sent here principally after the revolution in 1930. Notice that some of the train cars were used for the guards and the prisoners, but also separate ones were used for tourists. This is interesting because it's a chart of the nationalities and the ages of the inmates in 1900. Notice the Italianas. And these are the professions. Notice journalists. You wonder if that wasn't political. No avocados, big surprise. This pictures the context of the cell that an inmate was in, who was only 35 years of age. And as the picture points out, was prematurely old. Whether that occurred before he went to jail at 35 or not, doesn't say. These are models of the little train. This for the guards and the prisoners. This is the layout of the prison. I'm now sitting to the right in that central hub of the gray or dark hallway, which is where all those displays were that I videoed. So I'm now looking into the out of the hub towards all of those hallways that radiate from it. Now I'll pan to show. So behind me is the exterior of the hub. I call it the hub. It was the main hall used for all kinds of purposes, generally with the entire population. I don't know yet whether it was used as the cafeteria, but these are all pavilions in which inmates were housed. There were various forms of heat. Showers function differently in different pavilions. As you can see, back in the early 1900s, they had a machine for soft drinks, and apparently they could buy beer with their meager savings from their even more meager earnings. And to continue my sick humor, there in pavilion number 3, the inmates apparently had novelties and gifts that they could use to send home to loved ones. This pavilion is in its original state at the time that the prison was abandoned, or it may have been damaged by some kind of weathering. It's cleaned out. No need to do two. You can see some rotting in the wood though, so it suggests maybe something took place afterward. But one can imagine it's very, very quiet in here. There's no heater, so it's cool. Cold if you had to spend a lot of time with just regular prison garb. One can imagine standing here when the men are all at lunch, and then try to stand here, see the guards on those platforms that go between the sides, hear the murmurings, maybe the shouts of men, one to another. Try to imagine the life. An outside area of the prison, perhaps the interior of the prison grounds, I don't know. Remains of an old ship, this being the rudder. It plied the coast with medicine and supplies for local people. And this would have been the remaining bow. It was rescued by the Navy for historical purposes. A more modern day mast and an ancient mast. Look at the crow's nest. This facility was turned over in its entirety to the military some time ago. I don't remember when. And we can't go there because that's the military. This is apparently a collection of school workbooks. It's in the art gallery entitled Infancia. I don't know if it means you can buy all these. It doesn't say a price on this one, so perhaps it's just an exhibit. But this one dealing with Mesopotamia. It may be a historical comic book or just maybe a page out of the booklets. It shows pictures. Now we'll go up these stairs as any criminal must if they live on the second floor. A little more light up here. I wonder if there was a priority as to who got upstairs or downstairs. This is a depiction of the Scotia expedition of Islas Orcades by William Bruce in 1902. And we think staying in certain hostels is not all that pleasant. And I'm thinking that what looks like a fence is actually a guideline that you can hold on to in a storm to get out here to what I think is the scientific center for weather. These pictures display the destruction of Shackleton's ship, which was called the Endurance. Nighttime picture of the Endurance locked in ice. The end of the Endurance as the ice blown by the wind crushes the ship. One of the final pictures as the Endurance sinks beneath the ice, crushed. Vertebrae of a balena whale. And there the harpoon. Damn. An interesting boat called a water boat. Looks like somewhat like a one of the inflatable rafts that a large ship carries today with the cover. This is a land-based whale factory. Perhaps they were just killed and towed in. An early photograph of Antarctica. Some prison-made weapons. Saw blade. This with a point at the end. Some damage to your brain. Devices for perhaps escape. A slingshot. Games. Perhaps gambling, dice. Some artwork. A fireman's outfit.